What if, on that fateful night, Cedric Diggory reached the Triwizard Cup alone? What if Harry Potter never touched the portkey at all? One split-second decision in that maze could have completely rewritten the destiny of the wizarding world. This is the story of an alternate timeline, a what-if historical retelling, where Cedric Diggory wins the Triwizard Tournament, and everything changes from there. The Triwizard Tournament at Hogwarts was meant to be a thrilling competition between three schools. It brought together the best young witches and wizards for a series of magical tasks, each more dangerous than the last. In the canonical timeline, that school year unfolded with mystery and peril. Harry Potter was unexpectedly chosen as a fourth champion, alongside Cedric Diggory of Hogwarts, Fleur Delacour of Beauxbatons, and Victor Krum of Durmstrang. The entire school watched as Harry and Cedric, initially rivals, developed a respectful camaraderie. By the time of the third task, the vast maze, Harry and Cedric were tied for first place, neck and neck in points. The two reached the end of the maze together and went back and forth in a heated, emotional argument of mutual generosity. Each team determined that the other should claim the victory. Finally, they agreed, as friends, to grasp the cup at the same time and share a Hogwarts triumph. That decision, noble and fair, led both of them to touch the portkey together in unison, transporting both to the nightmare that awaited in Little Hangleton Graveyard. But what if events unfolded differently right at this decisive moment? Here is our divergence, the fork in the road where history changes. What if Cedric claimed the cup alone? Imagine that as Harry lay on the ground, pain coursing through his leg, he realized he might not even make it to the cup without help. Cedric, a few steps away from the trophy, hesitated, looking back at Harry in concern. In this alternate scenario, Harry makes the selfless choice. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he shouts, "Cedric, take it! Go! You deserve the win! You're the true champion!" Cedric's eyes widen in surprise. What? No, Harry. Perhaps Harry gives him a brave, encouraging nod, even as he struggles to stand. Harry might be thinking of the countless times Cedric proved his fairness and friendship, and he cannot bear to rob Cedric of the victory Cedric earned. Cedric is torn. He doesn't want to leave Harry behind, injured and alone with a knocked-out giant spider nearby, and who knows what else in the maze. But Harry insists, yelling that he'll be fine and that Hogwarts needs a champion. At that same moment, the maze itself shudders ominously. The walls have been shifting and closing in at intervals. Time is running out to act. Cedric realizes that if he delays, neither of them might get the cup. He takes a decisive step toward the plinth. "Are you sure?" he calls over his shoulder. Harry, propping himself up, manages a tight grin. "Go! I'll catch up. Just win this thing for both of us." Heart pounding like a drum, Cedric Diggory nods firmly. He turns and limps on his sprained ankle toward the Triwizard Cup, which gleams with promise. In 3 long strides, Cedric reaches the plinth. He stretches out a trembling hand, every nerve on fire with excitement and relief. His fingers curl around the handle of the cup. The instant Cedric's hand touches that enchanted trophy, there is a familiar jerk behind his navel, the unmistakable sensation of a portkey activating. Cedric barely has time to gasp in surprise. In a blink, with a swirl of wind and colour, Cedric Diggory vanishes from the centre of the maze. He is whisked away before Harry's very eyes. Harry is left behind, stunned and suddenly alone in the eerie silence, with only the hulking form of the stunned Acromantula for company. Cedric has won the Triwizard Tournament, but he's gone. Cedric lands hard on his feet in a dark, cold place. The triumphant grin that was starting to form on his face fades instantly. This is not the Hogwarts maze, nor the cheering stadium he expected to see. It's night, but not the controlled, cordoned night of the maze under stadium lights. This is a desolate graveyard, under a wide-open sky full of stars. Old tombstones surround him like silent spectators. A giant marble angel looms nearby, and the air smells of damp grass and decay. Cedric's heart, already racing from the maze, now thunders in true fear and confusion. Where am I? He thinks, wand held tightly at the ready. Hello? He calls uncertainly, his voice echoing off crypt stones. There's no reply, only the rustle of wind in yew trees. A short distance away, hooded figures are moving among the headstones. Cedric squints through the gloom. He sees a small, hunched man creeping toward him, carrying something, or someone, in his arms. The bundle the man holds looks like a deformed infant, pale and scaly, with gleaming red eyes. Cedric feels a lurch of dread in his stomach at the sight of this grotesque creature. This can't be happening, he tells himself. It's just another maze illusion or obstacle. Perhaps the cup was bewitched to send him here as a final twist. But no, Cedric's instincts, honed by years of facing dark creatures in defense against the dark arts, scream that this is no mere magical challenge. This is real and very, very dangerous. Master, it's not him. It's the Diggory boy, the hunched man whispers in a panicked, raspy voice. Cedric's blood turns to ice. That voice. He's heard it before, or at least heard of it. The man's face glints in the moonlight as he draws nearer, and Cedric recognizes Peter Pettigrew, known infamously as Wormtail, a wizard who was supposedly dead, but whom Harry had told Dumbledore was alive and a traitor. Cedric's mind reels. Why is Pettigrew here, alive and free? And who is he speaking to? Master. From the bundle of rags and scaly flesh in Pettigrew's arms comes a high, cold voice, tinged with impatience and fury. What is this? Who are you? Cedric feels a jolt at the sound of that voice. It's coming from the twisted, infant-like thing Pettigrew holds. Realization crashes down upon Cedric. That must be Lord Voldemort, somehow alive, though not in any human form. Cedric does not need to see more to understand he is in grave peril. The Triwizard Cup was a trap. It was never meant to be a portkey back to the maze or the winner's podium. It was meant to deliver Harry Potter into the hands of the Dark Lord, and Cedric, by fate's cruel irony, has been delivered instead. For a single heartbeat, Cedric Diggory is paralyzed by shock. But he is a champion, Hogwarts' champion, and he hasn't survived the tournament's horrors just to die passively now. His survival instincts kick in. Cedric raises his wand at the advancing Pettigrew and Voldemort. "Stay back!" he shouts, trying to sound braver than he feels. His voice echoes through the cemetery. Pettigrew hesitates, surprised that the Hogwarts boy is not cowering. Voldemort's scarlet eyes narrow in malevolent displeasure. This wasn't the plan at all. They needed Harry Potter and his blood, not Cedric Diggory. For a split second, there's confusion between the Dark Lord and his servant, and Cedric uses that to his advantage. "Kill him!" Voldemort hisses angrily, realizing this boy is of no use and could escape to tell the tale. Pettigrew fumbles for his wand, juggling the writhing baby form of Voldemort in his other arm. Cedric reacts on pure reflex. His reflexes, honed by countless Quidditch matches and duels in DADA, might just save his life. Pettigrew screams, "Avada Kedavra!" But Cedric has already flung himself sideways behind a mossy gravestone. A jet of sickly green light erupts from Pettigrew's wand, illuminating the night for an instant as it sails past Cedric's left ear, missing by inches. The headstone beside Cedric explodes into dust as the killing curse hits it. Cedric's heart nearly stops. That was a brush with death like he's never known. Adrenaline surges through him. Cedric knows he cannot defeat an adult dark wizard, and whatever Voldemort is right now, not alone. His only hope is to escape, to get back to Hogwarts and raise the alarm. Scrambling for cover, Cedric points his wand at Pettigrew, shouting, "Stupefy!" A bolt of red light zips through the air. Pettigrew jinks to the side with surprising agility. Fear can lend anyone speed, and Cedric's stunning spell misses its mark, blowing apart an urn atop another grave. The young champion's mind races. The cup. He saw the Triwizard Cup land on the ground a few feet away when he arrived. That's his ticket home. In the shadows, Voldemort's high voice is shrieking furious orders. Pettigrew sets down the Dark Lord's baby-like form behind a tombstone and advances, silver hand glinting. Cedric doesn't realize it's a magical prosthetic. In any case, it looks menacing. "Come out, boy. You're as good as dead," Pettigrew calls nervously. He swishes his wand, and a fountain of sparks skitters over the gravestones, trying to flush Cedric out. Cedric crouches low, every muscle tensed. He spots the Triwizard Cup, lying amidst some weeds about 10 yards away, faintly glowing. If he can just reach it. But moving now will expose him. Gathering his courage, Cedric silently edges along the row of tombstones, making his way closer to the cup's position. He can hear his own breathing, ragged and loud in his ears. He tries to quiet it. Across the way, Pettigrew is muttering curses and swiping his wand to blast apart monuments one by one. The ground shakes as an obelisk shatters not far from Cedric's hiding place. Pettigrew is systematically eliminating cover. Time is short. Cedric realizes he won't get another chance. With a sudden burst of determination, Cedric Diggory dashes out from behind the angel statue that sheltered him. In a full sprint, he races toward the fallen cup. "There! Stupefy!" Pettigrew cries, whirling around. A bolt of red light speeds towards Cedric, grazing his shoulder. Pain blossoms, but he doesn't stop. Cedric throws himself into a headlong dive, arm outstretched. For a terrifying second, his fingers scrabble at empty air. Then clink. They catch hold of a handle of the cup. The portkey activates instantaneously, triggered by Cedric's desperate touch. Cedric feels a hook yank behind his navel once more. The graveyard, Pettigrew's outstretched wand, and Voldemort's shrill scream of rage all vanish in a whirl of wind and colour. Cedric's feet leave the ground as he is flung into the ether, hurtling away from Little Hangleton. He doesn't know where this portkey will deposit him, perhaps back at the maze's start, perhaps somewhere else entirely, but anywhere is better than in the clutches of Voldemort. Back at Hogwarts, only a minute or two has passed since Cedric disappeared from the maze. In the stands around the Quidditch pitch, now maze, confusion reigns. The judges and spectators saw a flash of portkey light in the maze's centre, but then, nothing. The eerie silence is unnerving. There were supposed to be alarms and fanfare when a champion took the cup, but instead, the signals went dead. Ludo Bagman's magically amplified voice faltered mid-sentence as he tried to narrate what was happening. Professor McGonagall and Hagrid exchanged alarmed looks. Dumbledore was already on his feet, his ancient eyes fixed sharply on the maze, sensing that something was terribly amiss. In the top box, Cornelius Fudge, the Minister for Magic, stood up in alarm, unsure what to make of this unexpected turn of events. Harry Potter himself was still inside the maze, though not for long. After Cedric vanished, Harry, wounded and bewildered, managed to send up red sparks of his own, a signal of distress that the patrolling professors quickly noticed. Within moments, Professor McGonagall and Hagrid found Harry hobbling near the cup's last known location and guided him out of the maze to safety. It took Cedric, Harry was saying hoarsely, collapsing onto the grass once outside the maze. The cup. It was a portkey. Cedric's gone. His words sent chills through those nearby. What did he mean, gone? Bagman's magical microphone accidentally carried Harry's shaken voice to a section of the stands, and a ripple of gasps spread through the crowd. Cedric Diggory had won, but vanished. How? Before panic could truly take hold, there was another flash of blue-white light at the edge of the maze. With a thump, a figure materialized out of thin air and hit the ground, rolling. Gasps of astonishment echoed. Cedric Diggory had returned. He appeared just outside the maze's entrance, the Triwizard Cup clutched tightly in one hand. His robes were torn and muddy, he was bleeding from a cut on his shoulder, and his face was a mask of shock and terror rather than joy. For a heartbeat, the entire audience froze, trying to process the sight. Then cheers began to erupt. Some students in the stands started screaming in triumph, thinking this was just an unconventional finish. "He's back! Cedric did it!" the Hufflepuffs roared in delight. But their cheers died almost as soon as they began, because Cedric did not raise the cup in victory or smile. Instead, Cedric stumbled to his feet, dropping the cup and shouting, "Professor Dumbledore! Where's Dumbledore?" Albus Dumbledore was already vaulting over barriers to reach him, faster than one might expect of a man his age. In seconds, Dumbledore was at Cedric's side, steadying the trembling boy with both hands. Harry, limping forward with McGonagall's help, looked on in confusion and relief. Cedric was alive. But something was clearly very wrong. Cedric's eyes were wide and haunted. He gripped Dumbledore's robes, urgency in every line of his face. In a voice that rang across the now hushed stadium, Cedric cried out, "It was a trap. The cup was a portkey. It took me to a graveyard. I saw Voldemort. Voldemort is alive. He's coming back." A collective gasp, then dead silence, fell over the assembled crowd. The name Voldemort, rarely spoken aloud, reverberated like thunder in their ears. Students, parents, and teachers alike looked on, stunned. Up in the top box, Cornelius Fudge went pale as parchment, his mouth opening and closing in disbelief. Amos Diggory, Cedric's father, who had been cheering moments before, now stood frozen with a look of pure bewilderment and growing horror on his face. Dumbledore's expression turned grave, but not surprised, as though he had feared something like this all along. He pulled Cedric into an embrace for a brief moment, the relief of the boy's return palpable. Then, in his calm, authoritative voice, amplified sonorously, Dumbledore addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen events, the tournament has ended. Please return to your homes and dormitories calmly. Professors, please help escort our students, especially those from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, back to the castle. The champions need immediate attention." Chaos threatened to erupt. Murmurs of, "Did he say you know who?" rippled through the stands. But the headmaster's firm tone kept people from panic. The faculty sprang into action, moving to herd the confused and frightened spectators away. Madame Pomfrey rushed forward to tend to Cedric's wounds and Harry's leg, while Dumbledore, McGonagall, and Snape formed a protective huddle around Cedric, peppering him with low, urgent questions as they guided him toward the castle. Harry joined them, insistent on hearing what happened even as he limped along. Cedric, voice shaking but determined, recounted everything as they moved. "The cup brought me to a graveyard. Little Hangleton, I think. Peter Pettigrew was there. He's alive. He had Voldemort, or what's left of him, some kind of horrible baby-like form. They were going to kill me. They wanted Harry, his blood, to revive Voldemort fully. I dueled Pettigrew and escaped. Professor, it was him. It was Voldemort. I know it." Cedric's words tumbled out in a rush. Beside him, Dumbledore's face set into steely resolve, while McGonagall looked as if she might faint then and there but kept it together, and Snape's complexion went whiter than a ghost. Harry listened, heart pounding. He felt simultaneously sick with guilt for not having gone with Cedric, and relieved beyond measure that Cedric was alive and warning them all. Before they could reach the castle doors, however, another figure came sprinting toward them, pushing through the crowd. "Cedric! Cedric!" It was Alastair Mad-Eye Moody, or rather, the man everyone thought was Moody. In truth, this was Barty Crouch Jr. in disguise, the architect of the entire scheme, and right now, his plan had fallen apart. Barty as Moody was wild-eyed and looked strangely panicked as he closed in. "Thank Merlin, lad, you're alive," he growled in Moody's distinctive voice, grabbing Cedric's shoulder perhaps a bit too hard. "Come on, we need to get you out of here. Quickly, there might be curses lingering from that portkey." Something was off. Dumbledore noticed it at once. Perhaps it was the odd glint in Moody's magical eye, or the overly urgent way he attempted to steer Cedric away from the others. Cedric himself recoiled slightly. Having just escaped one enemy, his nerves were raw and sensitive to any suspicious behavior. Dumbledore raised a hand. "Alastair, wait. he said sharply. "I think it best if Cedric goes straight to the hospital wing. Poppy is already here." His eyes were fixed piercingly on Moody, but Moody persisted, almost frantic. "No, Dumbledore. I need to get the boy to safety. I need to question him." He reached inside his coat as if to draw his flask or wand. In that split second, years of friendship and intuition told Dumbledore everything. The man in front of him was not the real Alastair. The real Moody would never try to take charge over Dumbledore in such a moment, and certainly wouldn't interfere with Madame Pomfrey's medical care. In canon, it was at this juncture, with Harry's return, that Moody revealed his true colours by dragging Harry off. Here and now, with both Harry and Cedric present, and Dumbledore on high alert, the impostor had run out of luck. In a flash of movement belying his age, Dumbledore whipped out his wand. Stupefy! A red bolt struck Moody square in the chest before he could react. The false professor crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Cedric staggered back, eyes wide. He hadn't fully realised Moody was a threat until that instant. Harry's jaw dropped. Professor McGonagall gasped, and Snape stepped forward, looking grimly satisfied, as if he'd suspected this all along. "Severus," Dumbledore said curtly, "if you would retrieve the Veritaserum from my office." Snape nodded and swept away to fetch the truth potion. Right there on the lawn, in front of a handful of stunned onlookers, Dumbledore murmured an unbinding spell. The figure of Alastair Moody began to transform grotesquely, Polyjuice potion wearing off. The scars and mismatched features melted away to reveal the younger, feral-looking face of Barty Crouch Jr., a man supposed to be a convicted Death Eater long dead in Azkaban. A collective shudder of recognition went through those present. Within minutes, under Veritaserum, the captured Crouch Jr. was spilling out his secrets in a manic, truth-compelled monologue. How he escaped prison, took Moody's place, and turned the Triwizard Cup into a portkey to deliver Harry Potter to Voldemort. He confessed to every manipulation, enchanting Crumb, helping Harry through the tasks, and murdering his own father, the missing Barty Crouch Sr., to keep the plan hidden. Cedric and Harry listened in horror as the full extent of the plot was laid bare. For the Hogwarts staff and ministry officials present, it was a night of revelations. Cedric's eyewitness testimony and Barty Crouch Jr.'s confession painted a consistent, terrifying picture. Lord Voldemort was on the brink of returning to full power. Only a twist of fate, Harry not touching the portkey, had delayed the Dark Lord's resurrection that night. But for how long? One might expect that armed with such evidence, Cornelius Fudge and the Ministry of Magic would have immediately believed the threat and begun preparing. But alas, in this alternate timeline as in canon, the reaction was tragically flawed by denial and politics. By dawn, Fudge had arrived at Hogwarts, flustered and desperate to regain control of the situation. He listened with a kind of obstinate incredulity to Cedric's vivid account, and even to Dumbledore's calm explanation of what must be done. Fudge's eyes bulged at the mention of Voldemort. He patted Cedric on the arm and said, Now, boy, you've been through a terrible ordeal. It's understandable if you're a bit confused. You know who, back? Let's not be hasty." Cedric couldn't believe it. Here he was, scarred and bandaged in the hospital wing, recounting how he'd barely escaped death at Voldemort's hand, and the Minister of Magic was suggesting he was confused. Dumbledore's temper notably flared, just as it had in canon when Fudge refused to accept Voldemort's return. "The evidence is before you, Cornelius," Dumbledore said in a dangerously quiet voice. "Barty Crouch Jr. has admitted everything under Veritaserum. Cedric Diggory, a trusted witness, the winner of the tournament, has seen Voldemort in the flesh. We have no luxury to cling to denial." But Fudge, deeply shaken by the implications, began grasping at straws. He pointed out that Barty Crouch Jr. was a madman, possibly imagining things, and that a boy as young as Cedric might be misremembering events under trauma. When Dumbledore pressed, urging Fudge to act decisively, to secure the Department of Mysteries, to put Aurors on alert, to quietly begin evacuating and protecting potential targets, Fudge balked. This is all highly irregular. Such an extraordinary claim. It would cause a panic. Think of the public reaction, Dumbledore. I must have solid proof before I make any statements. Things took an even darker turn when the subject of Barty Crouch Jr. himself came up. Dumbledore intended to have Barty give official testimony before the Wizengamot, confirming Voldemort's plot. But Fudge, fearing scandal, and perhaps fearing what that testimony would mean for his career and the Ministry's reputation, brought a Dementor to guard Barty. In a horrifying repeat of Cannon's mistake, that Dementor swooped in and administered the kiss to Barty Crouch Jr. before he could be formally questioned, sucking out Barty's soul and leaving him a lifeless husk. Cornelius, you've destroyed the evidence, the last member of a noble pure-blood family, gone, and with him, our key witness, Dumbledore thundered, furious at Fudge's blunder. Fudge sputtered that the Dementor acted on instinct and that it wasn't intentional, but the damage was done. Now all they had was Cedric's testimony and Dumbledore's word. And while those carried weight with some, Fudge's mind was set on denial. To admit that Voldemort could return on his watch was, to him, unthinkable. So, in this alternate timeline, just as in the original, a schism formed. Dumbledore wasted no time. Within hours, he had dispatched messages to allies, quietly reactivating the old Order of the Phoenix. The threat of Voldemort's return was imminent, perhaps delayed, but real. Alastair Moody, the real one, rescued from captivity, was revived and outraged to learn what had happened in his absence. He immediately took Cedric aside, praising his courage and grilling him for every detail of that graveyard duel. Professors McGonagall and Snape closed ranks around Dumbledore, ready to fight what they knew was coming. At Hogwarts, the end-of-term feast was a somber affair. There was no joyous celebration of a tournament well won. Instead, Dumbledore stood before the school, and with Cedric's assent, openly told the students the truth. In a grave voice, he announced that Lord Voldemort had attempted to return to power, and that although he hadn't succeeded that night, dark times were likely ahead. The Triwizard Tournament has ended not with the celebration we hoped for, but with a stark warning, he said to a silent great hall. Cedric Diggory's courage in the face of this danger is the reason we are forewarned today. We owe him a great debt. Remember this, all of you. While we may come from different schools and countries, we are united against the dark forces that would harm us. Be vigilant. Remember Cedric's words. Dumbledore raised a toast to Cedric Diggory, a true champion. And the Hogwarts students, even the skeptical Slytherins, applauded thunderously. Cedric, modest and still shaken, blushed as he raised his goblet. It was a bittersweet moment. He had eternal glory, yes, but at the cost of innocence lost. Meanwhile, Cornelius Fudge, pointedly, did not join in any toast. By the next morning, Daily Prophet headlines were cautiously reporting Cedric's win, but were strangely mum on details of the aftermath. Fudge suppressed the full story, releasing only a statement that there had been an unforeseen magical accident at the conclusion of the tournament and that investigators were looking into it. Cedric Diggory, when pressed by reporters, stuck to telling the truth, that he was transported by a portkey to a graveyard where he encountered Death Eaters and Voldemort himself. The Prophet, under the Ministry's influence, printed his account, but heavily implied the young man was confused or exaggerating due to shock. One snide article even suggested Cedric's vivid story was a result of post-traumatic stress and overexposure to danger during the tournament. The Ministry was clearly trying to muddy the waters about what really occurred. But Cedric Diggory was not someone they could easily discredit. He was a universally liked, respected, and now famous Hogwarts champion, a student with top grades, a record of fairness, and no history of mental imbalance. Unlike Harry, who had already weathered skepticism over Parseltongue rumours and the Chamber of Secrets incident, Cedric had a clean slate and a golden reputation. Many in the public found Cedric's tale deeply alarming and convincing, even if the Prophet tried to downplay it. Cedric's own father, Amos Diggory, who worked at the ministry, raised a huge ruckus within his department, angrily demanding that his superiors take his son's claims seriously. At home in Ottery St. Catchpole, Amos broke down in tears of gratitude when Cedric returned alive that summer, but he was also outraged, bellowing in the ministry atrium that, "If my son says you know who is back, he's back. Denying it won't make us safer." Other parents of Hogwarts students, especially those who had been in the stands and heard Cedric's initial shouts and Dumbledore's announcement, formed a concerned undercurrent in wizarding society. Could it be true? They whispered in shop queues and over butterbeer at the Leaky Cauldron. Cedric Diggory has no reason to lie. Why would Dumbledore and Cedric concoct such a tale unless it were true? Thus, the wizarding world's perception of Voldemort's return became sharply divided. On one side, you had the ministry's official stance. Nothing was confirmed, likely just an accident, nothing to worry about. On the other, a growing number of witches and wizards, especially those loyal to Dumbledore or connected to Hogwarts students, who believed Cedric's warnings and took them to heart. This division set the tone for the coming year. Harry Potter's role in this altered timeline took on a different flavour. Harry did not witness Voldemort's resurrection firsthand, because in this timeline, the Dark Lord hadn't successfully returned yet. Harry hadn't duelled Voldemort or watched Cedric die in front of him. Those traumatic memories that haunted Harry in Canon's Order of the Phoenix were absent. Instead, Harry's nightmares were of almost reaching the cup and the horrifying thought of what nearly happened to Cedric. He felt a gnawing guilt that Cedric alone fell into that trap, mixed with relief that Cedric survived. In some ways, Harry's burden was lighter. He didn't carry the weight of having seen a classmate murdered, or the horror of Voldemort's fully restored power at age 14. But in other ways, it was heavier. He had to grapple with not being the sole voice of warning. Would people have believed him if Cedric hadn't been there to speak up? Harry was keenly aware that Cedric's credibility made a difference. The two formed a close bond over the summer, after exchanging many letters and even meeting in secret under Dumbledore's arrangement. They shared information and tried to make sense of what was coming. Cedric confided in Harry all the details of that graveyard, as much as he could recall, and Harry, who had his own past encounters with Voldemort in infancy and in his first and second years, offered Cedric moral support and a unique understanding of facing that fear. Privately, Harry also felt some envy towards Cedric's newfound fame and respect. After all, Cedric was lauded as the champion who survived Voldemort, whereas Harry, though technically also a champion, was somewhat sidelined in the public narrative. But Harry's good heart overrode any jealousy. He was genuinely grateful Cedric was alive and on their side. It was actually somewhat of a relief not to stand alone as the sole herald of doom. In this timeline, when Harry returned to Hogwarts for his 5th year, he found he wasn't ostracized or ridiculed by most of his peers as he had been in the original OOTP story. Cedric's public stance lent Harry credibility among the students. The Hufflepuffs, in particular, rallied behind Cedric, and by extension Harry, resolutely believing their champion's account. Ernie Macmillan, Justin Finch-Fletchley, Hannah Abbott, and others who had been fond of Cedric went out of their way to tell anyone who'd listen that Cedric's warning was true. Even many Ravenclaws, typically skeptical, trusted the word of someone as well regarded as Cedric, and let's not forget, Cedric's girlfriend Cho Chang spread the tale too, proudly defending that Cedric saw what he saw. Thus, Harry did not return to a school full of doubters and sneering detractors. Aside from some staunchly ministry-loyal or Death Eater-influenced Slytherins, the majority of Hogwarts students accepted that Voldemort was likely back or on the verge of it. This made Dolores Umbridge's job much harder when she was appointed as Hogwarts High Inquisitor. Yes, Fudge still went through with that plan. He remained deeply paranoid that Dumbledore might use these rumours of Voldemort to seize power or undermine the ministry. Perhaps he was even more desperate to control the narrative now, because Cedric's testimony had given the Dumbledore camp a boost. So Fudge unleashed Senior Undersecretary Umbridge on the school to silence lies and enforce the ministry's line. But to Dolores Umbridge's surprise and chagrin, she walked into a castle where the students were largely unconvinced by the ministry's sunny assurances. Many of these teenagers had seen Cedric's distress with their own eyes at the tournament's end, or heard about it firsthand from friends. Umbridge's syrupy sweet insistence that you-know-who is definitely not back, and anyone saying so is telling dangerous lies, was met with thinly veiled disbelief, even open hostility. In defense against the dark arts classes, when Umbridge refused to teach practical spells and dismissed Voldemort as a figment of rumor, students boldly challenged her. Some quoted Cedric directly. "Cedric Diggory says he dueled a Death Eater. Are you calling him a liar?" one Hufflepuff asked hotly, landing herself in detention. Soon, Umbridge's quill was scratching out, "I must not tell lies," on the backs of scores of student hands, not just Harry's, because so many stood with him in speaking truth to her power. Sensing rebellion, Umbridge doubled down with strictures and punishments, but this only united the student body further. The DA, Dumbledore's army, formed as in canon, but now it had an even larger membership across 3 houses. Almost all of Hufflepuff and many Ravenclaws eagerly joined, inspired by Cedric's ordeal to prepare for what might come. In fact, the initial founders of the DA considered naming it Diggory's Army, both to honor Cedric and to needle the ministry. They stuck with Dumbledore's Army for tradition's sake, but the sentiment was there. Harry still naturally became the leader and instructor. He had, after all, battled Death Eaters before, in earlier years, and was a favorite of Dumbledore's for these things. But Harry would often invoke Cedric's experience during meetings. This is not just theoretical. Remember, Cedric faced real dark magic. If it weren't for his stunning spell at the right moment, Pettigrew would have killed him. That's why we're practicing stunners again and again, so if the time comes, we can react just as fast. The DA. Sessions were intense and purposeful. The sense of impending real danger was much more tangible to these kids than it had been in canon, where many doubted Harry for months. Of course, not every ripple was grim. Cedric's survival also changed some personal stories at Hogwarts. For one, Cho Chang did not spend her year grieving a lost boyfriend. Instead, she was proudly dating Hogwarts Triwizard champion. She and Cedric grew even closer through the summer. The ordeal had deepened their bond. So when Year 5 started, Cho wasn't a sad, conflicted girl trying to ask Harry out amid trauma. She was a determined young witch who often spoke out in Cedric's defense, much to Umbridge's annoyance. She still joined the DA, but without the baggage of heartbreak, which meant no awkward Harry-Cho mistletoe moments occurred. Harry's crush on Cho cooled more quickly in this timeline, when it became clear Cho's heart firmly belonged to Cedric, and that was probably for the best, as Harry had bigger things to worry about, and eventually found his feelings for Cho replaced by a supportive friendship with her. Interestingly, Cedric's continued presence at Hogwarts, he often visited on Dumbledore's behest to talk to certain students or to coordinate with the Order, meant that Harry had an older brother figure of sorts during this turbulent year. Cedric would occasionally drop Harry an encouraging word via owl or show up under a disillusionment charm to help the DA practice safe hexes. Fred and George Weasley jokingly dubbed Cedric the People's Champion for his willingness to stick his neck out even after graduating. Speaking of Cedric after Hogwarts. At just 18, he was thrust from being a recent graduate straight into the front lines of the brewing war. Rather than taking a job at the ministry as he might have, under happier circumstances, he could have become a young aura in training or joined the Department of Magical Games and Sports, given his talent for Quidditch. Cedric became one of Dumbledore's unofficial agents. The Order of the Phoenix welcomed him, albeit some members were hesitant about including someone so young. But Alastair Moody famously said, "I'll take Diggory over half the Aura office any day. He's actually faced down you-know-who and kept his head." With that endorsement, Cedric got involved in select Order missions. He wasn't sent out to battle Death Eaters, not right away, but he proved immensely useful in other ways, he could publicly rally support that older Order members couldn't. For instance, that winter, Cedric clandestinely met with his former head of house, Professor Sprout, and other influential Hufflepuffs and Gryffindors at the Ministry to share his story, thereby quietly recruiting sympathizers. These efforts meant that when Voldemort did eventually return openly, a larger network of wizards was mentally prepared to believe it and resist. And Voldemort's return was coming. He had not been destroyed, merely delayed. In the shadows, the Dark Lord seethed at having missed his prize. After Cedric escaped, Pettigrew hastily fled Little Hangleton, with Voldemort's wraith-like form clutched to his chest. They went to ground, hiding in an abandoned house, while Voldemort plotted his next move. The grand plan to use Harry Potter's blood had failed for now, and worse, they'd been exposed. Voldemort knew that Dumbledore would waste no time acting on Cedric's warning. Enraged though he was, Voldemort was nothing if not cunning. He decided to lay low and regain strength until a new opportunity arose. But he could not wait too long. Each day he remained in that pitiful limbo body was a day of risk of discovery, and risk of his followers losing faith. So, how might his resurrection occur in this alternate timeline? Without Harry delivered conveniently to his doorstep, Voldemort had two options: attempt the ritual with a different enemy, or find another way to capture Harry. The problem was the magical significance of using Harry's blood, which in canon circumvented the protection of Lily's sacrifice. In this timeline, perhaps Voldemort, desperate to regain a body, would decide to use whatever means available first and worry about Harry's blood later. It's conceivable that within a few months, Voldemort directed Pettigrew and such free-roaming loyalists as he had, like the traitorous Ministry employee Lucius Malfoy and other Death Eaters who hadn't been arrested after the First War, to procure what they needed for the ritual again. Perhaps they abducted a lesser-known Aura or Order associate, someone they deemed an enemy, to take Harry's place in the blood sacrifice. It wouldn't be ideal, but it might suffice to restore Voldemort's body, albeit leaving him unable to touch Harry due to the lingering ancient magic. The Dark Lord might consider that an acceptable temporary setback. He could always seek to overcome that protection later. So let's imagine that in early 1996, in some secret location, a second dark ritual was performed. Picture a midnight gathering in a remote, broken-down manor house. Pettigrew, trembling but obedient, dropping a bit of bone of the father. Perhaps they carried Tom Riddle Sr.'s bone from the graveyard with them, slicing off his own hand again for flesh of the servant, and taking by force the blood of a kidnapped enemy, say, the blood of Kingsley Shacklebolt or another brave Aura who fought Voldemort's forces in the First War. It could even be that they targeted someone like Alastor Moody. Ironically, after Moody was freed from his magical trunk prison at Hogwarts, he would be a prime target for revenge. But Moody is too wily. Let's assume they chose someone less heavily guarded. That blood sizzled in the cauldron, and this time, there was no Harry's mother's enchantment to complicate matters. With a blinding flash and terrible screams, Lord Voldemort was reborn once more, rising from the cauldron in a new body. Snake-like face, crimson eyes, pale skin restored to a corporeal form. He was back, but he still lacked the protection workaround that Harry's blood would have given him. No matter. He planned to deal with that nuance after eliminating Harry directly. Once Voldemort regained his body in secret, the Second War truly began, though initially in the shadows. He kept his return quiet at first, likely ordering his Death Eaters to move carefully. But with renewed power, he carried out plans that had been on hold. The mass breakout from Azkaban happened a bit later than in canon, perhaps spring 1996 instead of that winter, but it happened nonetheless. When it didn't catch the Order completely flat-footed. Thanks to Cedric's early warning, the Order of the Phoenix had been watching known Death Eater haunts and was quick to respond to signs of mobilization. There were a few skirmishes in secret. For instance, rumours reached the Order of Odd Gatherings at the old Riddle House in Little Hangleton, Voldemort's family home. Albus Dumbledore even led a covert mission there at one point, but they found it abandoned. Voldemort had relocated by then. Still, each minor clash or tip-off further convinced formerly skeptical people that Cedric and Dumbledore had been right all along. By the time Voldemort finally chose to make a bold move, a significant portion of the wizarding populace was mentally braced for it. That bold move still came at the Ministry's Department of Mysteries, as the Dark Lord was hell-bent on obtaining the prophecy about himself and Harry. In the canon timeline, this was the trap that lured Harry to the Ministry in June 1996 and resulted in a battle and the tragic death of Sirius Black. In our alternate timeline, how might this play out? If Voldemort returned to a body a bit later, he might postpone the prophecy plot accordingly, but he'd be eager to hear its full contents. It's plausible that by summer 1996, Voldemort decided to strike. The Department of Mysteries battle might actually have been more balanced in this timeline. Here's why. Because Cedric's testimony had swayed more people, Harry wasn't as isolated or discredited. By this point, even Cornelius Fudge's denial was crumbling in the face of accumulating evidence of dark activity. Perhaps not officially, but behind closed doors, Fudge had started bolstering aura squads just in case, and some in the Ministry, like Amelia Bones of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, were taking Cedric's warnings seriously, even if they couldn't say so publicly. So when Harry began having disturbing visions, courtesy of his Scar connection, of Sirius being tortured at the Ministry, he didn't have to rely solely on a handful of friends to act. In canon, Harry was isolated under Umbridge's regime, and no adults were around to consult. In this scenario, while Umbridge still tried to thwart Harry's contact with Grimmauld Place, Harry had at least one other ally, Cedric Diggory himself. It so happened that on the very day Harry had the vision of Sirius at the Ministry, Cedric was nearby. He had come to Hogsmeade under disguise to meet with some DA members, as part of a secret training session organised by the Order. When Harry and Hermione incapacitated Umbridge in the Forbidden Forest, that part likely still occurred, as Umbridge was as nasty as ever. They might have had the presence of mind to send an urgent message to the Order via one of their coins, or perhaps the Flu network in the castle, once Umbridge was out of the way. Instead of just a group of 5 teenagers rushing to the Ministry, the Order was alerted much sooner. Thus, when Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny, Luna, and Neville arrived at the Department of Mysteries to save Sirius, who, it turned out, was not actually there, it was a trap as expected. They didn't face 12 Death Eaters alone for long. Within minutes, reinforcements arrived. Kingsley Shacklebolt, Tonks, Moody, and yes, Cedric Diggory, who had been at headquarters and flew in with the advanced guard. The ensuing battle in the Hall of Prophecies still had its perils and casualties, but it unfolded with a few key differences. More Order members present meant the fight was less one-sided initially. Cedric, fighting alongside seasoned auras, more than held his own. He wasn't as powerful a duelist as, say, Mad Eye, but all his DA practice and fresh aura training under Kingsley paid off. Cedric ended up paired against a Death Eater. Let's imagine he duelled Antonin Dolohov, the dark wizard who in canon seriously injured Hermione. Cedric remembered Harry warning him about Dolohov's silent curse, so he kept his shield charms tight and managed to stun Dolohov after a fierce exchange. Tragically, Sirius Black's fate might or might not change in this scenario. In canon, Sirius died after a one-on-one duel with his cousin Bellatrix Lestrange, falling through the veil. Could Cedric's presence have altered that? Possibly. With more fighters on the field, Sirius might not have been as isolated when facing Bellatrix. Perhaps Cedric, after felling Dolohov, saw Bellatrix dueling both Sirius and Kingsley. He could have jumped in to assist, sending a curse Bellatrix's way that she barely dodged. It might not stop the inevitable. Bellatrix was a dangerous duelist, but it could mean the difference between Sirius getting hit by that fateful spell or having an extra second to duck. Let's indulge an optimistic thought. Maybe in this timeline, Sirius does not die in the Department of Mysteries. Maybe Cedric's timely intervention disrupts Bellatrix's lethal curse just enough. It still strikes Sirius, but as a glancing blow rather than a direct hit, knocking him down but not through the veil. The fight then shifts as Harry and Remus rush to Sirius's side, and Bellatrix, frustrated, flees with the other Death Eaters when they realize the battle is turning. For by now, Dumbledore himself had arrived in the atrium to duel Voldemort, who showed up in fury once the prophecy was destroyed. When Voldemort appeared in the Ministry atrium that night, ready to personally kill Harry and take the prophecy, he was met not only by Albus Dumbledore, as in canon, but by a scene far more chaotic and less favourable to him. For one, he arrived to find many of his Death Eaters incapacitated or captured by the joint efforts of DA students and the Order. The prophecy orb had smashed in the struggle, so Voldemort's goal was lost. And in this timeline, as he materialized in the atrium in a swirl of dark smoke, he didn't just face Dumbledore alone. A few paces behind Dumbledore stood Cedric Diggory, Harry, and Sirius, dazed but alive. Dumbledore ordered the young ones not to intervene. This duel was beyond any of them, but the psychological effect was significant. Lord Voldemort's red eyes fell upon Cedric and for a fleeting moment showed recognition and wrath. "So, you lived, Diggory," he hissed, his voice echoing off the marble walls. Cedric felt a bolt of fear, but he stood his ground, wand in hand. It was Harry, however, who stepped forward next to Dumbledore, meeting Voldemort's gaze with equal parts hatred and courage. Two teenage boys who Voldemort had tried and failed to eliminate, both present, both defiant. The duel between Voldemort and Dumbledore unfolded in magnificent, terrifying fashion. Silver shields, serpents of fire, and whirling torrents of water conjured and dispelled. In the end, as in canon, Voldemort was forced to flee when Ministry officials, including Cornelius Fudge himself, arrived via the Floo network and finally saw the Dark Lord with their own eyes. One might imagine Fudge fell to his knees in shock as Voldemort vanished, muttering, "He's back. It's true. It's all true," effectively ending the long era of denial. The fallout was swift. The Ministry publicly acknowledged Voldemort's return at last, clearing Dumbledore's and by extension Cedric's and Harry's names completely. The wizarding world's perception of Voldemort's return shifted overnight from skepticism and rumour to full-blown alarm and unity. Cedric Diggory was vindicated for every word of warning he'd spoken. The Prophet ran headlines like, "Diggory and Potter tell truth, you know who cited at Ministry battle," and even printed apologies, meagre though they were, for not heeding the warnings sooner. From that point on, events in the war align more closely with a better prepared version of canon's later half. Fudge was sacked, replaced by a more competent minister, Rufus Scrimgeour, who immediately sought out people like Cedric to bolster the Auror ranks. The remaining Death Eaters were on the defensive, and while Voldemort still had strategies, the war was far from over. The forces of good had gained not only time, but morale and manpower, thanks to Cedric's survival and advocacy. As the Second Wizarding War raged over the next 2 years, Cedric Diggory grew from a talented teen into a formidable young wizard. By the time Harry was embarking on the dangerous mission to find and destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes in 1997, Cedric was 20 years old and an Auror in all but official title. He volunteered for countless missions, protecting Muggle-born families, defending the Burrow and other Order-safe houses, and engaging Death Eaters in skirmishes when they tried to make strikes. His name became something of a beacon in those dark times. The Daily Prophet, now free of Ministry censorship, ran human interest stories on "The Boy Who Survived," again, highlighting Cedric's role in forewarning the world. Many found hope in his example, a normal, bright kid who stared evil in the face and lived, refusing to be silenced. Hogwarts students from Hufflepuff and beyond spoke of Cedric with almost reverence. His yearmates like Angelina Johnson and Alicia Spinett, who had joined the war effort too, often said, "We're fighting for people like Cedric, people who should have had their whole lives ahead of them, if not for Voldemort." In this timeline, Cedric Diggory's continued life became a powerful symbol of what could be saved, a tangible reminder that Voldemort's schemes could be thwarted by the brave. This is not to say Cedric's survival single-handedly won the war. Prophecy still bound Harry and Voldemort to their fates, but it did alter the journey significantly. For Harry, having Cedric out there fighting the good fight was an emotional boon. During the lonely Horcrux hunt, Harry would occasionally hear updates via the Weasleys' radio or the Wizarding grapevine. Each such story strengthened Harry's resolve and reminded him of what he was fighting to protect. Hermione once commented that Cedric had become something of a folk hero, almost like the anti-chosen one. He chose himself to stand up, in a way. Harry had smiled at that. He didn't mind sharing the spotlight if it meant more people had hope. By the time of the Battle of Hogwarts in May 1998, the final showdown, Cedric Diggory was right there on the front lines. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione returned to the castle with Voldemort's Horcruxes nearly destroyed, the call to arms went out to the Order and DA members. Just as Professor Sprout was leading the Hufflepuffs in flinging mandrakes and venomous tentacula off the ramparts, and Professor McGonagall was animating suits of armor, a great roar went up from the school's entrance. Reinforcements had arrived. Bursting through the front gates came the Order of the Phoenix, and at the forefront, alongside Kingsley and Lupin, was Cedric. Older, battle-hardened, but very much alive and determined to defend his alma mater. He had brought with him a cadre of new Aura trainees and DA alumni. Cho Chang, despite graduating, had insisted on coming to help defend Hogwarts too, to the dismay of her parents. Throughout the fierce fighting in the corridors and grounds of Hogwarts, Cedric made his mark. In one notable duel, he and Professor Flitwick together took on Yaxley, coordinating charms and jinxes so effectively that the Death Eater was overwhelmed and stunned. Later, in the chaos of giants and acromantulas joining the fray, Cedric helped Lee Jordan and George Weasley fend off Fenrir Greyback from attacking injured students, driving the savage werewolf away with a blazing conflagration charm. Those who witnessed Cedric's duels that night said he fought with a fearless valor, as if every spell he cast was in defiance of the Dark Lord who had tried to kill him years before. And then, in the early hours of morning, came the moment that had to come. Harry Potter's final confrontation with Voldemort. That part of the story remained destiny. Harry went into the Forbidden Forest to sacrifice himself, was struck by Voldemort's killing curse, and survived through ancient magic. In the ensuing confusion, as Narcissa Malfoy's lie allowed Harry to escape death's clutches unnoticed, the battle resumed for one last exchange of curses. In the Great Hall of Hogwarts, Voldemort faced off with Harry in full view of everyone. The ultimate duel. Cedric, bruised and bloodied, stood among the onlookers with bated breath as Harry spoke, trying to get Voldemort to feel remorse. When Voldemort raised the Elder Wand and Harry cast Expelliarmus, Cedric's heart leapt into his throat. The twin spells collided, Avada Kedavra versus Disarming Charm, and miraculously, Voldemort's curse rebounded upon the Dark Lord himself. With a flash of green light and a rushing noise like wind, it was over. Voldemort fell, dead, onto the floor, his wand flying into Harry's hand. A moment of stunned silence was followed by an eruption of noise. Cheers, cries of joy, relief, triumph. In that jubilant chaos, Cedric Diggory found Harry and threw his arms around him, both young men laughing and crying at the same time. "You did it!" Cedric shouted above the din, eyes shining. Harry, hoarse and exhausted, grinned. "We all did." After the battle, as the sun rose over the ravaged but free Hogwarts, Cedric took a moment to reflect. He wandered through the rubble of the courtyard, helping the injured, comforting the mourning. He spotted Harry sitting on a stone bench near the entrance, looking utterly spent. Cedric sat beside him quietly. No words were needed. They shared a look of understanding. They had both come so far from that night in the maze. Cedric reached into his pocket and, with a small smile, pulled out something to show Harry. It was the crushed and bent Triwizard Tournament badge that he'd worn on his robes 3 years ago, the night he won. It had been damaged during his scuffle with Pettigrew and Voldemort, and Cedric had kept it as a reminder ever since. "Crazy tournament to win, huh?" Cedric said with a gentle laugh. Harry chuckled, shaking his head. "The craziest. But I'm glad you did," said. Harry meant it deeply. If Cedric hadn't taken the cup, Harry might not be alive, and the war might have gone very differently. Cedric clapped Harry on the shoulder, both of them understanding the weight of that simple statement. In this alternate history, a single moment, Harry's choice to let Cedric take the cup alone, altered the course of magical history. Cedric Diggory's survival created a ripple effect of changes. Voldemort's return was delayed and witnessed only by an unexpected victim who lived to tell the tale. The wizarding world received an early warning, though tragically many chose not to heed it at first. Harry gained an ally and friend who stood with him in dark times, easing his burden. The Ministry's smear campaign lost much of its bite in the face of Cedric's integrity. As a result, the resistance to Voldemort was stronger and more unified when the truth finally came out. Fewer lives may have been lost thanks to the extra vigilance and preparation. And Cedric himself went from the spare that Voldemort tried to dismiss to a key player in Voldemort's downfall, a living testament to the idea that every life can make a profound difference. It's fascinating and humbling to consider how differently things could have turned out with just a slight shift in timing and choice. In the canon timeline, we mourn Cedric Diggory as a brave young man who was tragically struck down, his death galvanizing Harry and others to action. But here, in our hypothetical scenario, Cedric lives, and by living, he inspires and galvanizes perhaps even more. He exemplifies the best of Hufflepuff House: loyalty, fairness, and a quiet sort of heroism that ends up shining as brightly as the boy who lived. The war against Voldemort still demanded great sacrifice and courage from many, but having Cedric there altered the texture of that fight. In the end, Voldemort was vanquished for good, as foretold by prophecy, by Harry Potter's hand. That remained a fixed point in history. Yet everything leading to that end was transformed by a single decision in the maze. One young wizard's survival rippled outward, changing despair to hope, division to unity, and adding another lion-hearted leader to the forces of light. A single moment, grabbing a cup a heartbeat sooner, made all the difference. It teaches us that in both the Muggle and magical worlds, the smallest choices can have the biggest consequences. So, what if Cedric Diggory won the Triwizard Tournament? We've seen a glimpse of that world. A world where a kind and noble Hufflepuff lived to play a crucial role in the Second War against Voldemort, where Harry had one more friend at his side, and where the Phoenix of Hope was kindled just a bit sooner and brighter. It's a poignant reminder that the lines of destiny can bend on the tiniest of moments, and that every life, every choice, matters in the grand story. Cedric's fate pivoted on such a moment, and in doing so, it altered the fate of all. Who knows how many countless other stories in the wizarding world, and our own, hinged on a single decision. History is a delicate tapestry, woven from the threads of what-ifs and if-onlys. In this tapestry, Cedric Diggory's golden thread shines a little longer, and the pattern of events shifts into a new design, one of resilience, unity, and triumph against darkness.